Good morning, everybody. It's a nice Saturday morning for many of us, I would imagine. Thank you for taking the time today to listen to this relatively short webinar. Over the next 30 to 40 minutes, I'm just going to spend a bit of time talking about the difference between, or some of the changes that have come up recently at the Project Management Institute in relation to the PMP certification. My name is Richard Wesson. I am a PMI certified person in both Agile and PMP. I apologize, I wrote Agile Certified Professional instead of PMP there. I have both certifications. And I'm also a certified trainer in Agile and PMP, so I'm just going to take you through the major differences that have come up as a result of the last role delineation survey that PMI did last year. And without further ado, I will proceed. At the end of the session, there will be some time for questions, so I'd ask you to hold them up or to build them up, and then we'll ask questions together. What I usually find is people will have similar questions, and then so I can answer one question all at the same time for everybody. So let's begin. This is a brief agenda of what I'm going to talk about. First, just a recap or an overview of what a PMP really is or what it's about. For those of you who may or may not be familiar with that, the reason I'm doing that is because some of you, I expect, are already certified PMPs, others are maybe thinking about it, and others may be considering this as a new career choice, so I just like to set the context for everybody. The second is I'd like to talk about what the PMBOK is. That's called the Project Management Body of Knowledge. It's a document issued by the Project Management Institute, or sometimes known as PMI, and what's changed to it and thus the certification process in 2015, set to be finalized by January 11th, 2016. And how does it affect you? If you're a PMP, what does it affect you? If you're not a PMP, what do you need to do, and how do you get up to date? And then at the end of that, we'll have some questions, and I would encourage you, if anyone has any questions about that, please ask as many as possible to make this as valuable as possible. So starting with a little bit about PMP in general, it really is just a qualification. It's a project management qualification. It's issued by an international organization called the Project Management Institute, and it is industry recognized across many industries, not just software or anything like that. It's across many industries, and it is recognized generally as one of the more thorough and one of the more appropriate project management methodologies in the market. That's why it's a good qualification to have. It does define methodology for running projects, and it evolves like that. But really, the main reason that PMI went out and created this methodology and then continues to fly on it, it's intending to create consistent value with projects that do deliver real business value. So they're actually looking at what is the end value to the business or to the buyer or the customer at the end of this project, not whether it was done on time, not whether it was done according to budget, but also what value did it really provide, okay? In order to not go over budget or limit that and not go over time, it needs to be well planned. It needs to have risk mitigation put in there to avoid unknowns as much as possible. And it needs to always be focused on the objectives that are directly related to the business value that's supposed to be delivered. Now this all sounds like common sense to me, though as a project gets bigger and more complex, it's a lot easier for these things to go off on tangents, and it's also a lot more easier to lose focus on this. So PMI and the PMP mechanism and the whole methodology itself is all about making sure that you stay on task. And staying on task, delivering in whatever it is, according to objectives, then by default delivers value unless those objectives were incorrect, and then the whole reason for the project was incorrect. So we can't change that, but what we can do is make sure we stay on the task and then we know when we're finished. And another way to do that is regular monitoring. Now different areas of PMP can be either weekly or bi-weekly monitoring, or it can be anything up to every day when you're looking at Agile and PME put together. And one way to stay focused on objectives also gives you a managed scope, because we all know that once scope gets out of control, things get complex. Budgets and timelines certainly out of whack, and then the more money you spend, the less value you deliver. So PMI's projects are generally broken into these 5 phases. Now, I like to, when I'm doing a project with along these kinds of or with this methodology, I like to at least have each one of these stages, even if one of them is bigger or smaller than the other, depending on the project itself. Now, they're designed to be able to stretch from small projects through to large ones. So sometimes you may need initiation and planning. Sometimes they'll actually be very close to each other. Sometimes they'll be distinct phases. It really depends on what you're doing. What I would indicate, though, is if you don't actively exclude one, then you're missing out, and then you're missing the methodology. If you have a reason to actively exclude one or actively join two, for example, that's also fine. All I'm really saying is make sure you do it on for a deliberate reason, not coincidentals. So the 5 phases are initiation, they're planning, they're execution, monitoring and control, and closure. Initiation, as it says, how you set things up. Planning is once you've set up the delivery and the objectives and what you're going to do, how you physically make it happen. So note, planning doesn't happen in initiation. Initiation is more about value definition. Planning is about, so it's the what. What are you going to do? Why are you going to do it? What is it going to give you in the end? Planning is about how do you get there. Execute is about getting there. Monitoring control is saying, are you veering from the path or are you on track? What do you need to do to continue to do that? Has a risk come up that you need to handle? Right through to the end, where you close it, where you close the project with formal closure, where you restate what you said that you were going to do in initiation. You measure it. Did you get there? How far off were you? Were you ahead? Were you behind? What value was really delivered? And there are metrics for these all the way through, and that's what makes this a good methodology. So my point here is, once again, all projects, if not all projects, will have these 5 phases. How big or small they are is up to the individual who's managing the project, but my general recommendation, because this spans many industries, and my general recommendation is, if you're going to exclude something in the IPEMC, I call it IPEMC, mode, you need an active reason as to why. Call them a stage gate. You cannot get to the gate without completing the other unless you have an active reason as to why, and that's a generally agreed thing. Where projects go wrong, especially in this methodology, is if people start putting them together or skipping them or saying, I don't need them this time or anything like that. And when that happens, you will find that you get tied up in knots and you lose the benefit that comes from a methodology like this. Now, I'm sure that we all recognize that the methodology for project management is more than 5 words, being the 5 phases. It's actually a very large set of books that have been put together called the PMBOK, Project Management Body of Knowledge. Now, this is a document or a publication from the Project Management Institute. You can actually buy it from their website, pmi.org, and it contains what PMI believe is all the necessary information, knowledge, and skills required for project managers to continually and repeatably, consistently manage projects with minimal deviation from plan. And as a result, they've honed this document, and they've honed this, it's at version 5 now, they've honed it quite a bit, and they've even made it a curriculum. So actually the curriculum for the PMI exam, depending on your certification, comes directly from the PMBOK. You need to know it. You will be asked questions about it. There are many different slants on it in terms of which certification you're going for, be it an Agile one, be it a PMP one, be it a Waterfall one, whatever that turns out to be. But at the end of the day, it's still one all-encompassing body of knowledge. It should be viewed as a curriculum, and even if you're not going for certification, it's good reading for anyone managing any kind of project. Now, not only can you read this yourself, but part of the PMP certification requires you to get some form of instructor-led, be it online or classroom training. It's actually 32 units if I remember correctly. Agile is 21 hours and instructor is 32 hours, I believe. I have to check. So GreyCampus, who's sponsoring this particular webinar, is one company that can do that, and there's certainly one that I teach with. I teach with others as well, but I would indicate that the not only do you need instructor-led, you need to be able to do online training, you need to be able to practice, and you need to also be able to understand and get access to the body of knowledge. I would suggest GreyCampus is a good way to do that. I have certainly trained at least 50 to 60 people in various PMI-related things over the last couple of years with them, and they have supported me well, and that's why I'm quite willing to recommend them. Now, for those of you who are PMPs already, what's changed? What do you need to know? Well, basically, last year, PMI, as they regularly do, 3 to 5 year intervals typically, role delineation study. And this is where they go and they say, all right, well, we created the PMBOK 4 years ago, 5 years ago. That was version 4. And we went out and talked to our members, be them project managers, be them customers, be them large companies, whoever it is, and we started looking at, has the role of a PMP and has the way projects happened varied? Has it evolved? What has changed? What has have core competency changed? Because the business environment has changed significantly. The biggest change has been the very global movement of Agile coming into the way projects are run. But that's not the only one. There's other ones as well. And there are a lot of them are about making sure that value is articulated. What I'm going to do in a minute is go through what each of these clear changes are, so you have a direct list of them. And if you're a PMP already, these are areas that are new that you would need to work out. If you're not a PMP and you're starting this, it just means that you have 8 more areas that you need to study out of the 60. Well, there used to be 56 and now there are 62. 64, sorry. I think, no. Used to be 50. I will check the numbers. They're in my next slide. I apologize because my memory is not so good. Now, they're broken down as such. Now, in PMP, they have a domain, and that's an area of expertise or an area of knowledge. In this case, for a PMP, that relates to the phases of the project. For Agile, that relates to the Agile principles, and so on. In this case, though, we're looking at the domain as initiation. There are 3 new tasks, because every domain has a set of tasks that are considered mandatory skills or knowledge for anyone who wants to have this certification. And they've added 3 to each one of those, except closure. They've 1 to planning, 2 to execution, 2 to monitoring control, and none to closure. Now, the good news for you is it was actually previously November. November 1st was when the new exams were going to be fully effective. Now, PMI have obviously had some troubles formalizing that, so they've moved that to the 11th of January. So between now and then, you can do the existing exam from the 11th of January onwards. You will be tested on the new content. They're piloting it still at this point. So what are the big changes? Okay, the role hasn't changed. Project managers still need to manage projects. They still need to manage them repeatably. They still need to manage them according to a process and a methodology, and that methodology has not really changed. What has added is, as companies get more and more savvy when it comes to business benefits, we've actually included in initiation more benefits and analysis, realization, and metrics around that. Okay, that's a very big thing, because it's all about proving what you have done and reminding the customer, whomever that is, of the value you have delivered. Now, so that's a very big one, and that's coming from a lot of Agile influence. The second one is risk used to be viewed as a negative thing. Risk can also, in a changing business environment, risk can also be looked at in terms of opportunity. So an impact from a risk can be positive or it can be negative. In previously, they used to call it a negative or a positive impact, or a negative or a positive severity. Now they call it a risk or an opportunity. It's just a terminology update, and it's just a way to think about it, to say that risk is not always bad. Risk can be good, and any of you who have been out in business for any length of time will realize that there's no business without risk. Every business has risk. Every day we deal with risk. So it's a better idea for us to look at risk as an opportunity as well as a negative impact. Otherwise, we get ourselves caught in a bit of a spiral of negativity, and that's never good for motivation or projects. The next one that's very key and very important in the new one is around benefits analysis, realization, and communication of that back to the people who receive it, i.e. the stakeholders. So how do we make sure we keep them on there, on task? How do we make sure we keep them understanding of what they're getting and what they're not getting, because projects can take a year or two. It's easy to forget, it's easy to get caught up. So it's about having the discipline to make sure that that communication is continual. And the last one is another one that's been influenced a little bit by Agile, is the focus on continuous improvement. So every time we execute and we monitor what's going on, so in monitoring control, it's not just at the end, it's throughout the project. We look at refining what we're doing to try to make it better, right? Because that's always a good way to learn from that. Every project has issues, every project has things that need to be dealt with, every project has lessons that we can learn. The methodology now formalizes that into continuous improvement and knowledge creation for to make things better the next time. They used to be called a one-project debrief. After a one-year project, you forget half of the things. This means what this is doing is putting it further in the monitoring control area to be further reminding, and we can make smaller changes across the project as opposed to big changes after a project. So in detail, in the initiation phase or the initiation domain, I've given here the task number because there's a list of tasks and then the description. The three ones are important. First is the task number 2. So the second thing you must do is make sure what the deliverables are based on the business requirements, to make sure that when we're communicating about deliverables and goals, we are communicating about business requirements, goals, and the benefit they provide to the people who are paying for it. It sounds like it should just make sense. It sounds like it should be something we do all the time. I wish that were the case, including myself. So what I'm going to point out here is this task has been specifically put in place to enforce that that happens, to avoid spending more time on customer handling that was preventable. It's a prevention, is better than a cure mechanism. Task 7 is about benefit analysis with the stakeholders. So they tell you how much it's worth to them. So when you give it to them, you say, here's the benefit I've given you. Right? Now that can change over time as the organization and businesses change, but at the end of the day, it at least ensures that when you start, you're directly related to the business objective of the organization that you're serving, be it your own organization or whether you're an external provider to them. And then the last one is about reminding people, once you've gone through setting things up and talk to stakeholders, and then when you kick off, there's usually been some scope negotiation. There's been some requirements negotiations. Some of them are related, some of them are not. It's about don't start until you have cleared off and covered off all people, to remind them again what they're getting before you start a single bit of project activity. It just makes good sense, because then you have something to go back to every single time, every time anything gets difficult. In planning, we've added a task at the end. It's really not only do you create a project plan, a time plan, a risk management plan, etc., you create a stakeholder management plan too, identifying which stakeholders you have, what do they need, what are they looking for, how often should you communicate with them. You would not communicate with the CEO as often as you communicate with the sales director in a sales project, for example, but making sure that you have a planned and agreed map as to how often you communicate and what you communicate, to make sure that that is succinct, to make sure that is to the point, and to make sure that we're talking about the reason and reminding each other of the reason we're doing something, not just massaging data for the sake of doing it. This is not a dashboard. This is about reminding each stakeholder, according to them, a targeted message related to the project that they need to hear, be it good news or bad news. Previously in projects, that just did not happen. It was sort of assumed to happen inside update meetings or steering committee meetings or whichever meeting that you had, but it was never really formalized. And what PMI have done is they've formalized it because they've recognized that communication is probably half of the problem any project has. The rest of it we know how to do. Communication is, because we're humans, expectation management, things like that, is one of the most complicated skills inside project management and inside a project itself. So PMI is saying we need to focus more on our training and certification program to ensure our project managers are better than the average Joe on that topic. Execution, really just about communication. We execute technical activities, we execute functional activities, we need to execute communication activities, and we need to do it according to a plan. So make sure, just like in the planning, we created stakeholder management and communication plan, we need to physically execute it, and it needs to be a task on the Gantt chart. It needs to be a task in the work breakdown structure. It needs to have a start and an end date. It needs to be regular. It's just about making sure that those things are included. Many project plans I've seen do not have weekly update meetings written on the plan. I think that's just ill-informed that it's not there. But we don't tend to think about it because it's not a technical task. It is, however, a task that happens in the project, so why is it not on the project plan? PMI are saying, put it on the project plan. I totally agree. And the second one in execution is follow it. So it's on the plan, we're following it, and make sure that we execute it. There's nothing more boring than meetings. However, if we don't execute them and our stakeholders don't know what's going on, we can't just send them an email saying, here's the update. If we do, they might read 1 out of every 5 of those unless they're particularly thorough, and as a result, what we need to do is put the meeting on the plan, everyone's seen it, then we arrange the meeting, we do it, everyone's there. When everyone's there according to a regular update, then all of a sudden we can actually manage expectations and capture or identify issues before they become a big problem. So in monitoring and control, we continue to do that, and what we continue to do it not only at the end of the project now, but at either predefined points along the way or even every status update. We add 10 minutes to the status update meeting and saying, what did we learn last week that can help us this week? This is an agile influence. Every 2 weeks you do this. So every 2 weeks maybe in a waterfall project. What did we do last week or the week before that actually made things better? So what do we continue to do? What do we stop doing? Is there something we should start doing? It could be, I need to write a small report. I need to call this person. I've found out calling the IT department, I should do that 2 days earlier than what I've been doing. Whatever it is about learning as we go to make the project better over time, not harder over time. Because existing projects typically get harder over time. We get closer to deadline, things get harder, we get more and more work, the to-do list is piling up, we get more stressed. If, however, along the way we're actually doing self-reflection as a team and understanding, wait a minute, we got ourselves a bit tangled up there. If we do that again, it's going to get worse in the next month. We should stop doing that and we should start doing this instead. Hopefully, we're proactively managing the stress at the end of the project when the time pressure really hits. And then the other one in monitoring and control is to make sure that we don't forget by when we need to procure and external dependencies. Let's say it's hardware. Let's say it's materials. Whatever it is, if we do not have a plan in place that says I must have this delivered by this time, then it becomes a dependency that delays the project. It gets onto the critical path. That's a bad thing. So our plans and our monitoring should be just as thorough when it comes to external dependencies as it is internal dependencies. Procurement is the most common risk. Oh, there's been a shipping delay, or there's been an issue at the docks, or whatever it turns out to be. We need to be actively monitoring and controlling that as well. A legal contract, whatever it turns out to be. Any one of those things can seriously degrade the performance of a project and thus should be actively monitored, actively controlled. And unfortunately, including me, we don't always stay on the ball with that. So a good PMI, a certified PMI is expected to be doing that. Once again, this will set you above, if you've got the certification and you're practicing this, it will set you above the average project manager who is not thinking about it, because it means you can predict problems and prevent them before they start. That is an immense value to your own personal brand and your own personal career and the project itself. So that's all of the major changes in detail. Okay, obviously I haven't gone into the maximum detail that we could, but I'm going to leave that open for questions because I suspect you all have your own thoughts on that. There is also an FAQ on the PMI site that talks about these things, and it also gives an updated list of all the tasks in each domain, of which there are 60 to 63 or something. So how do you get up to date? If you're already a PMP, right? I'm assuming most of you on this call would be, because that's the reason that you'd be interested in the changes. First things first, PMI show you what's old and what's new. So compare them. Have a look at the new body of knowledge. Have a look at the areas I've just spoken to you. And not only just look at them and study them, but look for opportunities where you can actually use them inside projects you're working on. There is no reason why you can't create a stakeholder management plan today on a new project. You don't need it to be in the methodology, but it's a good idea. It's only a one-page document. It's a good idea. Just look for opportunities to embrace it, to make it second nature, and then when you do your test, it's going to be simple. It's as simple as that. Same with continuous improvement. What would be wrong with in a regular project review meeting, maybe weekly meeting, whatever that is? Ask, is there anything that we could do better? How can we improve from this? Did we learn anything about this issue? So every time we go through and look at an issue, what's the next steps? Instead of moving on, say, can we learn, do we have an idea how to prevent this happening? That's continuous improvement. And it's all in the soft skills that we all bring to the table as the project manager, just to try to get the team looking at self-reflection, not in a bad way, but in a good way. Now, so the way you get up to date is you understand the new curriculum, you look at making changes and internalizing, digesting them, and practicing them. And all the other criteria doesn't remain changed, so if you passed the test last time, you should be able to pass the test again on the same criteria. You need to refresh, of course, but at the end of the day, that shouldn't be a big issue. And then between now and the 11th of January next year, you can do the pilot test, or after that you need to do the final test. You can do the old test. I would suggest waiting, because then you can go out and say, hey, I'm updated on the new specification for PMI, the new qualification. That means I have these 8 other things tested, and I have been practicing them according to my experience. That once again sets you above any PMP who hasn't got that for the next year or two, because you only need to recertify every 3 years. So that's what I would be doing, and that is what I'm going to be doing. I'm just waiting for that to happen. In the Agile scheme of things, I have already done it. I'm already on the new scheme.